9. Welcome to round 828. Nice bit of symmetry there. This is, of course, the Lifestyle and Community Committee, and let me welcome all member directors, councillors, our Deputy Mayor, and all visitors. Director, morning.
Morning.
To our wonderful secretarial minute-taking team, good morning. And to our city officers, our managers, people on the ground making this all happen, good morning. Today we don't have a big agenda, however we do have a few matters of general business which I understand councillors would like to bring forward for the consideration of committee and potentially full council. Before moving on to the substance of the agenda, I did want to note the apologies of Councillor Tozer, who contacted me this morning. Councillor Tozer is unwell. He might be tuning in remotely, but nonetheless ask that his apologies be noted. So I'd like to move that. Councillor Gates, do I have a seconder? Councillor Lecastra. Councillors, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. Yes, Councillor Hamill, you've thrown me there. Double count, double voting. Thank you very much, councillors. Any other apologies? No. Wonderful. No leaves of absence. Confirmation of minutes we can deal with as a start item unless there are any questions. No. Any conflict of interest declarations to make, councillors? No, we'll deal with that. Any questions on the committee forward planning schedule? No, we'll leave that starred. Reports and presentations on the local area works program additions. Councillors, any questions on those? Yes, Councillor Gates.
Just seeking a bit of guidance. I don't have a particular question about any of the issues that are on the additions, but I do have a question about a dog enclosure. Would you rather I raise that in general business?
Well, is it about dog enclosures in general, or is it about the specific one?
It's about a particular one in Division 3.
Which is not on the schedule?
No.
Well, we'll have a general discussion afterwards.
Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Councillors, any other questions on that item? No, we'll leave that one as closed. Sorry, not as closed, as starred. City Cemeteries Generation Planning Update. Councillors, I've had the benefit of a discussion and briefing from city officers. I have no questions on that. Were there any questions? No? Happy to leave that as a start item. Okay, great. Which leaves us with 7.2. I was quite satisfied with that item myself. Councillors, if you had any questions or would like a presentation, we can certainly keep that as an unstarred item. Or if there was a councillor who would like to move it in particular, happy for that. Happy to leave it as a start item? Okay. Right, councillors, so what I propose doing then is asking for someone to move items 2 through 7.2, then we can get on to the business of general business. Councillor O'Neill, did you indicate you wanted to move that? Seconded. Councillor Lecastra. Councillors, I will put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. Councillor Gates, would you like to open up a general discussion on your dog enclosure?
A couple of years ago, since the last election, I had many requests for an enclosure for a dog exercise area in Coomera on the east side of the M1. And ultimately the officers recommended a park, and I letterbox dropped the area and I got minimal response. So given that the officers had thought it was a viable location, it went to public ad in the annual presentation of parks for consideration as leash-free areas. And I honestly don't know what the response to that was, other than it became a designated off-leash area for dogs. And so no signage has ever been erected, but I popped a little notice on Facebook that the infrastructure was going in. So a fence and a water bubbler, and into the future some shade. And there's been the most incredible community outcry about that area in particular, because there's a block of units that go along one of the boundaries, basically, they back onto the proposed area. Or, well, it's actually designated, but no one is aware that it is designated because there's no signage, as I understand it. So I wrote to the officers yesterday to find out if there's ever been a precedent like this, where once designated, the community has now, I believe, taken up a petition against it being designated, and just what that process might look like, because now I know there's people who want it, but the immediate neighbours clearly don't want it. And it's designated as off-leash already. So I just thought maybe raising it here, we could get some formal guidance for how, obviously if I receive a petition in the next days, I'll present it, but the work was to commence, I think I'd allocated $45,000, and the work to install the fencing was to commence on the 1st of March.
So, Director and Councillor Gates, would you be comfortable if a memo be circulated to all councillors? Because I know I certainly receive requests.
Yep.
And I wouldn't mind just an overview of the process around identification, community consultation, thresholds which need to be met in order to support a project, and whether or not gazettal required a vote of council, which may be another opportunity for us to intervene, and the process for unstitching.
Appleberry Park.
Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Gates?
Yes, it would be helpful. I know that I referred it to Michael Smith yesterday, and he responded to me that he was trying to get further advice. So I'm not trying to say that the officers haven't assisted me. They have, and they've been very helpful, and Scott as well. But I just think it's a problem. And I don't know how to resolve it, because it's not one that's... I've advised the people that we've been through the appropriate consultation process. Some were so angry that they decided they'd go to right to information. I could only give them a copy of the letter that I had distributed, which I did myself. So I know that it went into every letterbox, and I think I got 3 responses. So I thought there was general, perhaps, apathy about it, so why not proceed? And then it went to the community consultation. I don't know what that involved.
Through the chair, so what we'll do, Councillor Gates, apart from, I mean, it's a very good idea for the memo to be distributed to you all to outline the process and look at what those benchmarks are in terms of a decision on whether, you know, we would go ahead with something like this or not, and the consultation. So consider that will be done. In your particular example, we'll look back at the results of the consultation that we undertook as well as your own. Mm-hmm. I have seen the situation before, right. So it is relatively common, believe it or not, because people get these notifications through the mail. Some people don't even read them. They don't realise the impact until it actually happens.
And this was 3 years ago now. Like, it was after the 2020 election, and it's obviously a community that, you know, people move, and
they do. There's
new
churn.
Residents have arrived, and some of the ones that have contacted me were not there at the time.
Yep.
So clearly they missed it.
So we're happy to review it in these circumstances, and just get to the bottom of what the initial consultation was, what the basis for concern is, and we'll review it on that basis.
Thank you very much, Director.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just let Councillor Gates know I've had a similar situation in a park in Coolangatta, and everything seemed fine. And then, you know, when we sort of issued some information about the fence going up, it wasn't fine. It's still a designated off-leash area, and the people who live on the park, around the park, are fine with that. They just didn't want the fenced area. So, but it is a bit of a grey area as to how much consultation and the time frame, because you're right, you budget for this stuff way ahead of when you actually do it. So I came up against the same problem, but we didn't end up putting the fence in. We decided that we wouldn't, because it was close to residents, but they were okay for the off-leash area to stay designated. So we had a bit of a win, I guess.
And did it have signage, if I could ask through the chair?
There is signage there, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And interesting, I was having a conversation with the director ahead of the meeting. I've got examples where there are parks over which many medium-rise developments kind of overlook, and some have used that park as an off-leash area, but the residents don't want that. And when I have sought to have signage erected to say that this is not an off-leash dog area, those haven't been supported by officers. So I think we need to have a general discussion around our approach to signage. We don't want a proliferation of signage, but if signs can help mitigate nuisance concerns and not overburden our animal management team who need to be responding to things like dog attacks, I think we need to be a little bit more pragmatic. On the issue of signage, and I'm not sure if we do this, but it'd be interesting if we can tease it out in the memo. I think if an area is proposed to be an off-leash dog area or be removed, during the period of consultation, it would make sense for a sign to be erected at that location, just so that people who are using the space can be alerted to the fact that there's something sitting on a website. Maybe we do that, maybe we don't, but I think that would be useful. Councillor Gates, your thoughts?
Well, the problem for these residents is in order to apply for right to information to get the results of the survey and what actually occurred, it takes 25 days and there's no time frame with the work due to commence on the 1st of March. So I think there's currently a pause on it, and I'd like to ensure that that happens until we thoroughly assess.
Yeah. Do you know if the residents have received a response from our right to information officer?
Well, they must have, because they told me that there was a 25-day wait and a fee that they were not prepared to pay.
So we have a policy governing the administrative release of information. So you may want to go back to the residents and say, while you're waiting for the 25 days, and it's on our website, if they send an email with the subject, request for the administrative release of information, that is a process which is at no cost and often quicker than an RTI.
Okay. I think I'll wait for the information and then we can make a decision based on what comes forward.
All right, thank you for
Thanks.
that.
Thank you.
The opportunity to have that conversation, Councillor Gates. Councillors, there are two proposed general business items. The first is proposed to be moved by Councillor Patterson. It concerns well, there are too many puns here, so I'll let you introduce it and then we'll embark on it.
That a review be undertaken to consider the design and maintenance of the city's public toilet amenities to ensure public safety, accessibility and a reduction of maintenance costs.
Yeah, happy to move that?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
No, I can't, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll move it then, and then I'll defer to you to
Okay,
speak.
thank
Is
you.
there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Belden-Lumsden. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. As we discussed this a few months ago, and it's raised out of a concern that's consistently occurring not only in my division, I'm told by officers, but across the city, where with public toilets in my space, there's some where the officers say, first of all, the expense of maintaining them is prohibitive, and even then they can't even keep up with the expense of maintaining them. To give you, so this is kind of vandalism, people using them for uses they shouldn't be using them for. And I had a matter that occurred recently with the police where they were taking people who had, there was public defecation. They took them for criminal behaviour, put them before the courts, and their defence lawyer successfully argued that it's fine that they're doing that because the toilets are locked at night time. So we had a discussion with the officers and with the police about what's the worst here, and at that time it was decided, look, we really do need to keep these toilets locked. But that, rather than that being an ad hoc decision that occurs at my level, it certainly makes sense that that's a proper assessment done by officers and looking at what can we do to continue that that SEPTED management of our public toilet spaces and to bring down this kind of maintenance costs that's occurring at the moment.
where a newly constructed toilet block over 2 months was vandalised 34 times. 34 times, set on fire, public defecation. It's horrible because these assets are often begged for by the community to unlock the recreational capacity of a space, support things like kids' birthday parties and what have you. But they can also be totally unusable. And in my case, city officers were able to, with security cameras, steel reinforced doors and all the rest, restore the amenity that had been lost due to the vandalism, but at some cost. Director, is it the case that you've already got some work bubbling away in the background on this?
Through the chair, yes, we do. It's an issue which is front of mind for us across the city. We have 255 toilets in our parks. We have an annual maintenance bill of about 1.9 million, which includes vandalism. So it's a not insubstantial amount of money. We're always looking to have a better value for money outcome. But as you've noted, Councillor Patterson, there are particular instances where, and so have you, Councillor Vorster, where particular toilet blocks in particular locations are heavily vandalised or misused. And we have to treat them all, I guess, in the context of where they are, and we do close up some of those toilets which have been abused. And we make that decision not lightly, but in consultation with the QPS. So we have it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's very much trying to contextualise it. We're also very aware of the increasing cost of construction on these toilets, and we've looked at, and we are, building some toilets which are off the shelf to be cheaper, but we are evaluating the whole of life costs of those off-the-shelf products versus the one that you talked about, Councillor Vorster, which we designed in-house. And because we designed it in-house, we were very quickly able to get in and replace the components, whereas we don't have that ability necessarily with the off-the-shelf products. So I'm very happy to bring a report back to you all on this. It's very complex and it's of great interest, I think, to everybody.
Councillor Owen-Jones?
254 toilets because the one at Oxenford got burned down.
I remember shortly after my election, city officers came in and said, Councillor, I've got some good news. We've got this project, building a toilet block at the Robina City Parklands. And I said, okay, whereabouts? It's at the entrance, it's at the end of the cul-de-sac. Okay, how much? I think at the time it was $355,000 for a toilet block. And admittedly, there were multiple toilets, but we're not talking about something as luxurious as the Paradise Point toilet blocks. But I remember pulling up the website for Metricon Homes. And I think I commented to the officers at the time, I'm like, look, for the same price, not only can I get the toilets, but I can get a living room, kitchen, 4 bedrooms and all the rest. So yeah, well, the money instead was used for the master planning for the first stage of the Green Hub. So in the end, it was a good outcome. But I think the community is often confronted, particularly by the costs of a toilet block. If we can demonstrate that we're running our ruler over it and considering total cost of ownership, it's a little bit easier for us to defend the investment. Because there's no sense for me spending $10 million on a park if people can't be comfortable while enjoying it.
You're absolutely right, Councillor Vorster. In fact, the example you cited earlier of the toilet block that got so heavily vandalised really demonstrates why we have to effectively over-engineer some of these toilets in some of these locations that we know are subject to this sort of abuse. And that all comes at a cost. And it comes at a cost to the ratepayer, which is very unfortunate. The other comment I'd like to make is, as many of you know, the quotes that we give for these include the provision of services. So it's not just the building alone, it's providing the sewerage line, the concrete paths, all of the additional bits that make that toilet a functional amenity. It's not just the building. And you know, when you look at the cost of providing that infrastructure, whether it be public or private, all of those services, the associated infrastructure has to be considered. But yes, public infrastructure is expensive. It's designed to last.
and probably even more contentious than a dog park at times. All right, councillors, were there any other questions, speakers against or for the motion? Oh, well, happy to put that then. Councillor Patterson, did you want to close? All right, all those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Just got a last general business item which I circulated to everyone here by private email. Okay, you should have a copy of that in your inbox. It reads as follows, councillors, and if there's a second, I'm happy to provide the background. That a report be brought forward to the Special Budget Committee for consideration during deliberations of the City Budget 23-24, proposing to establish a memorandum of understanding with the Rural Fire Service to formalise the eligibility criteria for the expenditure of the Volunteer Fire Brigade charge. If I have a seconder, happy to talk to that. Councillor Ballin-Lumsden, thank you. Councillors, as you know, there has been a years-long discussion about the role of the city in collecting fees for the benefit of rural fire brigades so that they can provide a benefit to us as residents of the city. Shortly after the reintroduction of the volunteer fire brigade charge, Councillor Hamill and myself were contacted by members of the Rural Fire Brigade with some concerns around the way in which expenditure was either allowed or not permitted at a local brigade level. And what we uncovered in discussions with them and with city officers is we have actually never had an internal policy around what type of expenditure is permitted and what type of expenditure is not permitted. And that has led to a little bit of inconsistency in acquittals in the brigade service, but also a little bit of frustration from a council perspective because things that are arguably operational have been dismissed as capital when there's probably a little bit of a grey area. The Rural Fire Service has been working with city officers following the representations Councillor Hamill and I have made to come to an agreement around what things should be ruled in and what things should be ruled out and how we're represented on the local spending committee. Council, what's that committee called? The local... Anyway, there's a local committee. That memorandum of understanding is 99% of the way drafted. However, I hold the view that it's probably a good thing for us as a council to cast our eyes over the MOU and for us to resolve how we wish this money to be collected, how we wish it to be spent, so that we can be sure what the purposes are of the levy at the time the budget is endorsed. This is at the request of the Rural Fire Service. It represents the work that's been done, I'll come to Councillor Gates then Councillor Owen-Jones, by city officers and gives us an opportunity to review it before it's potentially executed. I know it's contentious. I know the Mayor at times has not wanted to collect the levy. We've now resolved that it become a permanent feature of our rates notice, but it's not working for the rural fireys at the moment. The highest levels of their leadership, it's not working for them. All they're asking for is not an increased eligibility criteria, but certainty, and that's not provided because there is no current framework. Councillor Owen-Jones.
In preparing the framework, does it clearly identify the areas that the state government is already providing them funding for? So I reckon that that is the very first building block so that we don't fall into effectively cost shifting and meet the obligations of the state government in servicing their emergency services.
Yes, so thank you very much, Councillor Owen-Jones. I've only seen a first draft of the MOU and not a further draft, but it makes it very clear that this is not a cost-shifting exercise and gives us an ability to have a document that makes it clear that we're not interested in cost-shifting.
And the second point is that my observations of the Rural Fire Brigade is clearly all volunteer-based. The Gold Coast brigades are incredibly well funded operationally in comparison to some of the other brigades in Queensland, and in particular in regards to not requiring to do chook raffles to raise funds. But when they are mobilised by the state government, they can be mobilised to go anywhere in Queensland and interstate. The consumables that they are funded for by the ratepayers of Gold Coast, I think we need to bear that in mind in regards to whatever a memorandum of understanding looks like. So, and we also need to be clear, as I agree, in terms of what's capital and what's consumable. So a water tanker is, in my view, capital and should have been funded from the state government and not from the Gold Coast levy, because that's their responsibility. And when we fill the void that they've retreated from, that's a real issue.
And Councillor Owen-Jones, I couldn't agree with you more. I know Councillor Hamill couldn't agree with you more. And when we recently had a meeting, the RFS representatives couldn't agree more. What they're finding, though, is that there are, I'll give you an example, there are respirators, special masks or what have you, that rural fire brigade members might use in action, and they need to be stored in a particular environment so that they're not covered in accumulated dust and what have you, which can impact their operation. Now, I think the cabinet is about $5,000 to properly store those masks, and that's something that the brigades would, in their view, like this fund to help cover. It's a cabinet, it's $5,000, and it means that their masks can be used. Now, you might hold a view that that is capital and you've got no interest in giving them a space to store the masks because that's the responsibility of the state government. What this MOU will do is allow us to rule those sorts of expenditure items in or out. At the moment, there's an absence of an eligibility criteria and a framework. It comes down to a committee, and there are some inconsistent rulings which advantage some brigades and disadvantage some brigades, and is causing a bit of frustration. It's also leading to an under-expenditure of what we're collecting. So this gives us an opportunity to see what should be spent, what the budgets would likely be, and then gives us the ability to set the charge appropriately and try and address some of the frustrations of the brigades. Again, this is not, I don't have a rural fire brigade. This isn't something I've invented. This is a bit of work that the brigades themselves have asked us to do to assist their work. Councillor Gates?
Well, I have a concern. I agree with much of what Councillor Owen-Jones has said, and I think because we go back so far with this, we were around when the state withdrew from this service. And as far back as what year was it we approached the minister?
I reckon 2013-14,
Yeah.
so Dempsey.
I was there too.
Oh, I thought it was earlier.
No, so it was the Newman government, and it was immediately after that. So, and the irony is that
Anyway,
our rural guys will now go help Mayor Dempsey.
Yeah, that's right. And at the time, Minister Dempsey had agreed that they would fund the rural brigades as they should do. So it just worries me in terms of the review that's underway of the rural brigades, and it's hard to say those R words, and if we're jumping the gun a little bit, before the review that I understand from Councillor Hamill is underway at the moment, whether we should wait for the outcome of that review before we head off trying to establish a memorandum of understanding that binds council. So, when this is actually the states, we are cost shifting by giving the money.
So, Councillor Gates, to give you some assurance, the draft MOU has an annual review, so it's not binding in perpetuity. Two, the RFS are of the view that this is an urgent priority for them because they need clarity on what they, on which funding source is most appropriate for the items that they need to carry out their services, and it could be it gives them a strengthened position to negotiate with their state counterparts, knowing that there is something black and white that says what they're asking for can't come from another revenue source. And all it does is it allows us to define the purposes for which we are collecting the levy. And from just a simple governance point of view, we should have a document that we can provide to external organisations to say what's in and what's out.
Yeah.
At the moment, we don't have that. It's at officer discretion. Obviously, with regard to the council resolution, which says capital only, but as I said, there are some items that straddle the fence. All the brigades are looking for is certainty, and this might give it to them.
Yeah, and I have two myself in Division 3, and clearly I'd like to support them. I just believe that it should be done in concert with the state, because we've picked up the tab for the state ever since this happened, and it's not right, really, that council ratepayers are paying for this emergency service when it should be the state.
So we've had a philosophical argument, and I was there, obviously not as a councillor, but as a city officer. In the midst of all of that, still remember when the mayor was rattling the tin in front of the chambers and putting a $2 coin in it to make the point. That said, we didn't collect it, then we collected it, then we called it a transitional levy, and then we decided, I think last budget, to remove the word transitional. So for better or worse, we've resolved as a council that we're in the business of collecting this levy. The RFS simply asking, well, what's the purpose of the levy, so that they can have some certainty in how they can use it. And that's, from the advice that I've received from the RFS and city officers, that's not in conflict with any review of their service delivery or rationalisation of stations. It's not in conflict.
Is it because they haven't accessed the funds? Do we have a pot of money that has not been used?
That's right, Councillor Gates, because there has been uncertainty around what is in and what is out. So what they're looking for is the certainty that will allow them to access the funds that we're levying for their purposes.
Okay, so could I ask what's happening to the pot of money annually if it's not being spent?
Councillor Hamill?
Through you, Chair, my understanding is it rolls over, that because it's collected underneath that separate levy, it can't be used for anything else, it just rolls over, which, since I'm on the mic, was going to bring me to the one point I was going to add, is that there was community uproar when the transitional part was explained. I think there would be considerable uproar if the community was to find that we've got a big pot of money sitting there that's not getting spent while rural fireys are asking questions about what it can be used for.
Yeah, so I know, I can't recall which budget it was, but when we were looking at setting the rate for this levy, we had to look at what that balance was at the time. Yeah, and we were happy with the lower amount because there was sufficient funding there. But
So do we need to know what the pot of money, the total is, before we do this year's budget?
well, I'm sure that would be part of our budget papers that were presented. We can't ask questions line by line anymore, but I'm sure we can ask that. Any one of us can ask that and get an answer to it ahead of budget. I'd be very interested myself.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill?
Thanks, Chair, and I do support your motion there. I just hope it's clear, and obviously since you've had meetings with rural fireys, it probably will be clear to them that we are trying to help, not hinder. But it's interesting that the state government doesn't actually outline what they mean by capital as well. So I think that they need to do, maybe they need to be approached by the Rural Fiery Board to actually ask them to outline what they mean by capital as well, because it shouldn't just be left up to us. And I know that from my rural fireys tell me that they constantly battle trying to figure out, can they spend this money on this or that. So this is, I really support this. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to be clear to Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor Gates, I have no sense whatsoever that the rural fire brigades wish to have council provide a substitute source of funding for the state government at all. What they're merely looking for is clarity around how the funds that we are already collecting can be expended, and to the extent that we exclude items, which we can in the MOU, it gives them a stronger negotiating position with their counterparts in the professional service. Councillor Owen-Jones?
Simplifying it and making it clear is the goal, right? I think that we all appreciate the fact that the Rural Fire Brigade operatives themselves are all volunteers and they do an outstanding job, and we've always supported them. what has always got lost in this conversation is the nonsense that we get from our local state members in regards to the city abandoning rural fire brigades when we've done everything other than that. So that's my only concern. So if we're doing a memorandum of understanding, I'd really hope that the preamble is really clear as to where the rural fire brigade services sits in the state government controlled emergency services.
Right.
So, and we can happily confirm
Let's tuck that in now.
we can happily confirm to our state members that we will never walk away from those volunteers, but if they wanted to help, they could actually put their money where their mouth is and fund the capital stuff that actually needs to be funded.
So if we could turn that into an A. Then we'll add a B. That this report outline the obligations of the state government to cover capital purchases and other expenses.
And so I haven't seen any drafts, Chair, so I don't know whether, for example, we identify as items over $4,000 or $3,000 are capital in nature, items under that can be considered consumable. That might help.
Sure.
Provide some clear direction.
Absolutely, and we'll finish this off in a second, sorry, Kate, but 100%, and I think that's the purpose of bringing the MOU to us so that we can rule specific things in and out and set a threshold that we're comfortable with in consultation with the RFS. We're in control of this process. That this report outlined the obligations of the state government to cover capital purchases and other expenses to underpin the sustainability of the RFS. You happy with that, Councillor Gates? Councillors,
I think
in your hands here?
I think that makes sense because to refer it to budget, because even though we removed the word transitional, I don't know that everyone was on the same page with that, so possibly.
And yeah, so I think budget's where it needs to be at because it deals with the way in which a levy is permitted to be used, right? And that's a budget decision because we strike that levy at budget adoption.
Should we perhaps add something about the rolling over of funds for clarity so that we can...
That this report also provide an overview of the historical expenditure of the levy, sorry, of the Rural Fire Brigade charge, and the present balance.
Good.
Yeah. And again, councillors, this will go to special budget. Every councillor will be a member of it, and we'll clarify how this charge, if it is levied, which I expect it will be at budget adoption, how it's expended by the RFS. Councillor Owen-Jones?
And I've been part of budgets in the past where we've actually had a presentation from representatives of the Rural Fire Brigade. So maybe through your chair to the director, it's maybe something that the CEO might want to consider for this year as well, particularly if we're actually looking to formalise the MOU, because ultimately those volunteers on the Gold Coast are the ones that fight the fires. And if we've got something that can be improved in the MOU by the changing of a couple of words, having somebody with the actual real life experience in the room might really assist us in coming to the right decision.
I think I think that's a great suggestion. Would you then suggest that we invite RFS representatives to meet with us prior to the report at special budget or as part of that?
I think from what I'm hearing is the MOU is quite advanced. I just think it would help as decision makers if we had a representative of the Rural Fire Service as invited, as has happened in previous years.
Yes.
And it's just a suggestion. It's entirely up to the administration if that's what they think is.
So the RFS are keen to do that.
Yep.
They've mentioned it to Mark and myself. I suppose my question to you is, do you think what's the most useful moment to have that discussion with them? Is it at a meeting prior to the special budget where we consider this, or at the time?
Well, I actually think at the special budget meeting, because the MOU is going to have been negotiated, ultimately between the administration and the RFS. And if it hasn't quite landed right, that's maybe a really good opportunity for the officers to say, yep, spot on, we've nailed it, or alternatively, the external representatives say, a couple of words would make a world of difference here. And so I don't see it as being us needing to redraft whole sections, but it just might be that affirmation that what's been negotiated is what was required.
Okay. Are you happy to just take that?
Through you, Mr Chair, yes, I'll take that to the CEO for discussion. There's two options in front of us: to come back as part of the Special Budget Committee with the presentation. Alternatively, we can come before you with the Rural Fire Brigade prior to a Special Budget Committee, but I'll pass on, your preferred direction.
Yeah, and if it is before special budget, that they perhaps do a presentation at this committee, if we could provide notice of that presentation to all councillors. Just wouldn't want to have a presentation at a committee that might have interested a councillor and they haven't taken the step to attend. All right, happy where we've landed? It's consensus decision making. Councillors, any speakers against? Councillor Hamill, did you want to close? Okay, well, all right, I'll put that to a vote. Councillors, all those in favour? All those against? 4. All right, that's carried. Awesome. Councillors, any other general business items? No? Happy days. Happy to close the meeting at 9:55. Thank you for your time.